A foggy London night with the blur of a street lamp and the sound of feet walking slowly along, and you see the back of a man who's wearing a trilby and he's got his collar of his raincoat turned up and his feet are walking along on wet pavements. That's quite often the idea people have of Soho, quite often used to represent Soho. And in part it's true. When I was about 8 years old, my mother used to take me up from the suburbs into London and show me the sights, the National Gallery and such. And once she walked me up Shaftesbury Lane and pointed out all the theatres and all the names up in lights, the famous playwrights, the names of the plays. And as we were walking along, I looked up a little side lane and it looked very intriguing. There was strange people standing up there talking to each other on street corners. And I said, "What's up there, Mum?" And she said, "Oh, we don't go up there. That's Soho." And so that sort of stuck in my mind. And like most boys, I wanted to go where you weren't supposed to go. And there came a time in my life, in my 20s, when I wasn't anywhere. I wasn't doing anything. I'd sort of sunk into a stupor, really. I didn't have a job and I didn't really have anywhere much to live. And I found I'd drifted into Soho. And I found that most of the people hanging around there were somewhat similar. And the crossroads of Old Compton Street and Dean Street was, I felt, the centre of Soho. And I used to sit in Tolano's cafe making a coffee last for 2 or 3 hours and unaware that the man with the darkish skin in the corner talking to strange looking young ladies was actually Tony Rossi, the jackal of Soho, who selected street girls to work for the Messina brothers. It was later on I worked for the Sunday newspaper, The People, with Duncan Webb, who was a crime reporter, and he was concentrating on the Messina brothers and getting them out of Soho, and I was sent round to knock on doors and ask people's names and so on and get doors slammed in my face. But when I first went into Soho, I was just hanging around, and I found my way into what was known as the French House, although its real name was the York Minster, and met Gaston Berlaymont, the supposedly French patron with the whiskers. He was actually Belgian. And the inhabitants, the habitués of the bar, which were very small, incredible people. Although again at the time they were just people. I used to stand at the bar with virtually no money, and the drink around that area at the time was white wine. It was cheap. And I'd find myself nudging a bloke next to me and say, "Couldn't buy me a white wine, could you?" And they'd either push me off or say, "Oh, all right," and put some money down. And it was only later I found that two of the men I often was up against and listening to their talk and bumming a white wine, one was Francis Bacon and the other one was Lucian Freud. They were just names to me, and then I discovered, oh yeah, they painted. And from there, when the pub used to shut at 3 o'clock, automatically one wandered up to a club, and the Cave de France was the nearest one, and I'd sit and drink in there and either get someone to buy me a drink or, when I had a bit of money, buy them. And that way I met other interested people. John Deakin was someone I always would find there, a rather unpleasant man, but a brilliant photographer. He used to take photographs of all the women that Francis Bacon then painted. Bacon works from the photographs. And then down Old Compton Street towards Charing Cross Road, I go into the little café bar, or Journaux L'Étranger, often referred to as the French, which was rather confusing when the York Minster was referred to as the French. But in this gloomy little cafe, it was very small. It only had about 4 tables in there, I think. It's very gloomy and smelt a bit most fascinating connection of people. There was Ironfoot Jack, because he had one foot which was a big iron support, and he always wore a cloak and a big black Homburg. And there was Gypsy Larry, who wore a blue berry and a short red neckerchief, and a face like old tanned leather. And a lovely Cockney accent, and I remember him saying to me once, "Oh, well, I'll be off to Spain next week for a couple of months." And I thought, how can he afford that? And I said, what, do you play Spanish guitar and sing? No, he said, "Not too many old Kent Road, Knees Up Mother Brown. They love that stuff over there, it's foreign." And so I met character after character. And I've always wanted to write about it, and now I've decided the time has come, so I'm doing a lot of research. And it was a time just before the Cray brothers became popular. And it was Billy Hill time, and I knew Billy Hill, the gangster. I was there when Jack Spot was slashing Albert Dimes, and Albert Dimes slashing Jack Spot. A lot of stuff was going on around me. I just took it in my stride. This was the neighbourhood. This is what happened there. I got involved with a lovely guy, Bill, who had made a lot of money and was still making money out of selling excess war equipment. He'd sell half a dozen tanks to some Middle East country, but the deals were all being done around. Anything that was a bit dodgy but colourful was being done in Soho. And at the time I really didn't realise what I was in the middle of. And it was just the time when I was living there, and I lived in 2 different flats there, the girls were still on the street and they each had their little beat that they walked on. But then they were bringing in acts to try and curb this, and the first step the law had was that you couldn't solicit on the street. So there was a scurry around, and the people who ran them bought or rented first floor rooms, and all the girls would hang around in the doorway and then take you up to their first floor rooms. And I was living in one block. Well, both places I lived had a girl on the first floor. And the first place I lived, the woman on the first floor specialised in whipping. And so you'd hear this noise coming up through the floor, slash, oh, slash, oh. And when I'd been living there a couple of weeks, I met her in the street one day, and she said, "Oh, I hope I don't make too much noise and upset you there." And sure enough, after a little while, when I walked down Old Compton Street, instead of the girls trying to proposition me, it would be, "Oh, hello, Victor, bonjour, Victor," and it was a very nice feeling. All the shops were run by families, often French or Belgian or Greek or Italian, and they often lived above their shops. So it really was, in those days, a lovely little village, and I was really pleased to find myself part of it. Now my job is to pull all that together, relive it, so that my readers can relive it, get the feeling that they'd been there themselves.